following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back. New York Mets in the zone. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and I have a terrific returning guest who is not only an author, but an author of Mets books. And I enjoy your company so much, Matthew. Welcome back. Matthew Silverman. Let's take two. How about that? Matthew Silverman. I'll edit this. It'll be cool. I really, like I say, I appreciate your company because you're a maven, and I like speaking to mavens, and I like speaking about the New York Mets. Mets were my second love. I was a New York Giant fan as a kid, and I was devastated when they left at my age 11 in 1957, and mourn them and still mourn them on some level. They were irreplaceable. The Giant-Dodger rivalry of that time was incredible. It transcended baseball. What with Jackie Robinson coming up and what have you. But in 1962, I got my wish. I got a National League team to replace the Giants, and it was called the Metropolitans. And Matthew, if you could think back to 1962, how old were you, and what was your baseball experience at that point?
Well, in 1962, I was not quite here, but I came along a couple of years later, and it was, all the good stuff that happened with the Mets was pretty much over. The first wave of it, of the 72 and or 73, and 72 with Willie Mays coming back, and 73 with going to the World Series. And then after all that was extracted and they started breaking them up, that's when I came in.
Oh.
That's my exquisite timing.
The Bruce Beauclair years.
The Bruce Beauclair years, yes.
They were interesting years, recovering from Seavers and Kingman, the massacre. What did they call it? The massacre on Friday night.
The Midnight Massacre.
Oh, okay. That's
Friday night would have been okay. As it was like on a Wednesday, and I had to go to school the next morning.
Oh, wow. Wow. How old were you in 19?
And I was that perfect 11 years old that you were when the team left. So I had my own thing. I still had the team, but to be honest, there were definitely times that I wish they had traded the team and let me start over. But they did not.
Traded the team and kept Seaver. How about that?
Yeah, they could have traded the team and kept Seaver. That might have been better, but it taught me a lot of humility and other things like that, and an inability to root for the Yankees in any situation. Although I pretty much already had that before they traded Seaver, but that's just the way it was, and the understanding that being a Mets fan, there's a lot of uncertainty and angst and all kinds of other stuff that comes with it.
This week in Met history was a perfect example of angst and uncertainty. What started out last week, they were on top of the world, and all of a sudden, a leak in the boat. Are you concerned with that, or is that just something temporary that will be remedied soon?
Well, I mean, I'll start off by saying that I'm always concerned.
Okay.
From coming through with that whole thing. growing up there, that I always have some kind of like negative thoughts no matter what's happening. Probably the biggest moment was, if I hadn't been sitting in a dorm room full of guys, I might well have turned off, the game 6 with 2 outs in the 9th inning. But there was a whole bunch of people there, and it was Saturday night, so we kept watching, and it got a little crazy. But that's just a little bit of my background. But
Matthew, let me interrupt you for 1 second. I want to ask you a question about that 1986 miracle play with Mookie. Mookie claims that he would have beaten that out had Buckner played it everything the same, but Buckner plays it clean, and Mookie claims he would have beat him to the base.
I could go either way on that, because Buckner was awfully slow, but and I guess I have a picture of it that shows where Bob Stanley is and all that. So I would say it was about 50-50. It's hard to say. He was kind of like sidling down for that ball, and maybe the fact that Mookie was really fast was what made him maybe pull up just enough to create infamy and ecstasy at the same time. So I don't know. I think you could go either way on that.
Mookie's speed may have been what caused Buckner. Mookie's speed may have cost Buckner the concentration. He might have been looking up or whatever, and then booted it. But we'll never know then. We'll never know about that. But we do know that it was incredibly exciting. I remember thinking, this is it. And all of a sudden, they come back, and reminiscent of a Met comeback earlier this month. It came back 7-1 in the 9th and turned it around. That made me think of the comeback in '86. It's bittersweet being a Met fan.
And that's a good word for it. Yes.
Okay. There are days when it's tremendous, and then there are days, and I won't include yesterday's game, where they lost a very close but well-played ball game. And I enjoyed it from the sake of rooting for the team. Notwithstanding the results, it was a good experience. And what can I tell you? It's good to be a Met fan. It's not good to be a Met fan. Matthew, let's refresh my memory. How did you get into writing about the Mets?
Well, like I said, I started, was a fan during the 70s, and it was right around culminating with me going to, and if you hear like some noise, we're having a little thunderstorm coming through here in New York, and let's see, kind of talking about the Mets and the lightning striking, just to give it a little
flavor, a little poetic flavor.
And yes, and so, to be honest with you, I started. I think I can remember the first thing I wrote. It wasn't for anybody, but I used to, they had those electronic handheld games that came out when I was, in like 7th or 8th grade. And I remember the first thing I did was I took one of those games that was really good. I think it was the Mets and the Dodgers. And I wrote up a whole story about it, or maybe it was about a game I'd seen the night before. It was something like that. And Kevin Coble pitched, is how long ago it was, if you remember that frilly-haired left-hander.
I do remember his baseball card.
Yeah.
He was.
I had his baseball and automatic card. And I remember he pitched a good game. I don't know if it was in real or if it was through something that I created, but I remember sitting on my dad's typewriter and typing it up, and essentially copying what I saw Jack Lang write in the Daily News, that kind of style, and ended up a few years later went to write about our high school soccer team and then the hockey team for the newspaper back when that was encouraged by newspapers and they actually paid you back when people read them, and then
they had paper, ladies and gentlemen. They'd be hard to describe, but it was made of paper, and sometimes they delivered it, oftentimes not on time. So there was some frustration with that. You mentioned Jack Lang. Jack Lang wrote, before going to the Daily News, was kind of my hero when he wrote for the Long Island Star or the Long Island Press.
I think it was the Long Island Press, or maybe it was the Press, the Star, and became the Press, and then it got
right.
It was like the last Long Island paper that wasn't Newsday that was kind of big, and then he joined the Daily News, and that's when I caught up with him because I lived in Westchester County, so we weren't allowed to see any kind of newspaper from Long Island unless you were pretty much down by Shea Stadium. So then I got to experience him, and I still have one of the copies of his book, 25 Years of Baseball Magic, which is usually where I will go when there's something I can't corroborate, and if he says it's there, as the little Virginia said, if it's in the sun, it must be so. That's kind of my feeling. There is a Santa Claus old time story that if it's in that book, I assume it happened because he knew everything about the Mets that was there, and also because he was there for every moment that they had through 1986, and so he was kind of my hero. And to be honest, when I was a kid, a lot of friends, when they traded Tom Seaver and then, went into some kind of like hideous, now you would call it, a team that completely gives up. At the time, I didn't really understand that kind of concept. I still don't 100% understand it. But, if he hadn't continued writing about them, I might have stopped reading them. But, we still kept getting the Daily News every day, and I kept reading about it. And, there wasn't much to do back then.
Well,
when you were 11 years old, so I just kept watching.
It's interesting. You mentioned the Daily News, Jack Lang. Before him, there was Dick Young. And Dick Young basically was semi-responsible, him and M. Donald Grant. We called him M. Donald Grunt, if I remember correctly, but responsible for that massacre that we talked about with trading Seaver. Was there anyone that Seaver was traded for that you rooted for? Particularly. With me, it was Doug Flynn, and I thought he was terrific. But I'm wondering if that's how you looked at the trade. Let's get some worth out of this. Is Fred Norman, not Fred Norman, something Norman.
Dan Norman.
Dan Norman and Steve Henderson and Zachary. With me, I rooted very, very hard for Doug Flynn. I thought he was a good ball player and versatile. That was just off the top of my head. You were still very young.
Yes, I had. For some reason, I would get, and I still sort of use this. And one of the reasons I've written so much about the Mets is that if I, sort of experience it, I remember a lot of vivid details about it. And it served me well, writing several histories on the Mets. And to be honest, to give you the rather than tell you every day of what happened the rest of my life from the time I was 11, I ended up in newspapers. And then I was hired by the people that did, at the time it was the official encyclopedia of Major League Baseball, Total Baseball, and they had a company that produced a lot of baseball books, and I got involved helping them with that, and that got me out of the newspaper field and into the publishing field, and I kind of worked very hard to get a book published on it. What the first one would have been was Mets Essential. And then then there was a book on uniform numbers that this guy, John Springer, had done about the Mets. And, I was a little insane with uniform numbers. That's like how I was bad with numbers, so of course I became a statistician. But like uniform numbers was how I always used, to remember, people's, back when you had to remember people's phone numbers and you had to remember a lot more numbers, it seems, than you did. And I would always use Mets uniform numbers, and it just kind of clicked with that. And we did a book on that, and then I did like 2 other books on the uniform numbers. And but other than that, I did a lot of Mets books, because once I did one, people asked me to do more, and it just kind of blossomed from there. I think I actually, the Swingin' 73 book that we did an interview with, I think originally, that's probably one of the only, that and the Mets by the Numbers books, I think, are the only Mets books that I actually asked to do. If I, where I had to like fill out a formal proposal and use an agent and all kinds of stuff like that. Most of the other ones, they contacted me because they thought I could write a book on, what they wanted to do. And, the Mets, despite all their problems, are still in a major a metropolis. And the Mets seem to be a book that when they came out with different series, that they needed one on them. And a bunch of them called me. And it worked out really well.
How flattering it must have been.
Yes, and it's kind of and now it's kind of stopped, and some other people are doing that. But if someone wants to call me up and do some more, I'll be glad to do it. But I've tried to do some other things, and I've had some success with that. You get a little bit typecast, but not quite as bad as a child actor or something like that could never get another job in TV after they were in the Brady Bunch or whatever.
If you weren't writing about baseball, Mets in particular, what would be a secondary passion that you would have taken to?
You mean about other than baseball or something?
Yeah, other than the Mets, other than baseball, science, literature. What interested you?
Yeah, it still interests me. Literature. I have an English degree, so I had to read a lot of books, and I always, you learn about a lot of different people, and a lot of them were kind of interesting, and I was kind of picturing myself doing that. But sometimes you just have to read the tea leaves, and it wasn't really working for me in a lot of the projects I did with that. And they kept knocking on my door with the baseball, so I kind of ended up doing that. And like I said, you get a little typecast if you are working in the sports department. A lot of other people don't think that you are very smart or you can write about different things. So I ended up doing a lot of baseball stuff, and it's worked for me pretty well. And to be honest, a lot of other stuff bores me, or I don't want to, sit in I covered I covered town politics and stuff like that when I was first starting out and all that, and I have to admit that it was boring, and it never ended. Whereas a sports, a baseball game had a closing point when it was over, and some of this other stuff, you'd go and they'd be talking about it again, and then there'd be another iteration of it. And, it just seemed kind of tedious to me, but. I don't know if I answered your question or talked around it, but and actually this past year I was able to actually produce a novel that I had written a few years before called Out of a Dog's Mouth that I did.
Wow.
under a pseudonym because that is because of some of the marketing possibilities of the world, and also because things have changed. I was able to do some self-publishing, which I had never really done, and it's been a little bit of a slog, but I'm going to like the walkway over the Hudson and other humbling events where I people come by and go, oh, an author, how quaint. And so I do a bunch of those things as well.
Well, my take, you are happy in what you do. I hear it in your voice, and I hear the smile. I hear the self-satisfaction of doing it your way. And you're to be identified as that. You're
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know the best way to describe it, but there are people that work very, very hard, and it's a drudge to them, and they go through life without that glow.
Well, I have been there. I have been there too, where I've had to go back, a couple of different times and go work in an office or some other stuff like that, doing stuff that I don't really like to do, but did it anyway. But fortunately, my wife finally got the good health insurance, so I can spend more time working at. And now, the idea of working out of the house isn't seen as like some kind of pariah, sitting around eating bonbons all day. Although
right.
Bonbons are good, and naps, and no one's watching me if I decide that I'm just going to take a nap. So all those things are make for a little more happiness, I guess.
How have you changed since 1973?
The book or the year?
No, you yourself.
Let's see. Well,
because that was, we talked about that last time I had you on. That was my favorite year. They came back. They were going to fire Cashin and Yogi, and they had articles in the Post with quizzes. How many people want him fired, and Harrelson was hurt early on, and I was out in California, watched Game 7 or Game 6 in person, and was devastated by that loss as a Met fan. I knew they'd lose the next day, and I'm just thinking, 1973, I was in my 20s. I'm 75. How have you changed? How has your ideology changed since then?
Well, since I wrote the book, it's like since I wrote the book, I now can't see anything that happened in 1973 and not hit my head and go, I can't believe I didn't put that in the book. Because no matter if it even has anything to do at all with what I was trying to portray, I still am like, I could have worked that in the book if I'd really tried. And there were a lot of things that I tried that I tossed out because it just didn't take. But it was, doing the book taught me a lot of stuff, because that was one that I actually came up with the whole concept of it in like 2 minutes, and it ended up being working out really well. It was one, it got me an agent, it got me all kinds of other stuff that ended up working out pretty well. And I kind of consider like yesterday's game, for those not listening at this particular moment, it's an 8-7 loss to, who were they playing? Seattle, who didn't exist in 1973. The city did, but the team didn't. And they were down. It looked like they had no chance. They came back and they had, seemingly the team on the ropes with 2 guys on and only 1 out. And then the 2 guys struck out and the game ended, including a check swing on ball 4 that he did go around. And you're just, like, if you just had hadn't swung at the pitch, you could make yourself nuts all day. But that was kind of a microcosm where they really had. Also, for people who might not be familiar with the series where the Mets somehow went up 3-2 against an all-time ball club that was very well put together by
it was the last dynasty we've had.
Yes, and it ended up the Mets sort of let them off the hook. Even in Dick Williams' book, No More Than Mr. Nice Guy, he says as much as once the Mets pitched Tom Seaver in there, he knew he had him by the ropes because, that the Mets used their bullet when the other guy, and with Seaver, that John Matlack, who was a really good pitcher and was good at the time, but, the A's were just a classic example of a killer. They would just find a way to beat you, even though it looked like they weren't that great. They were, and they would kill you. And especially Catfish Hunter, who's one of these unassuming looking guys and country boy and all this, but with the ball in his hand, with a game on the line, especially the pennant with a title on the line, you could not beat him, even if you were Tom Seaver or whoever. He was going to find a way to win, or at least put his team in a position to win, and that's what happened both times, and that's how the reason the A's won that series. And
you have to give them credit. That's one time you can't go, we were robbed. Got to give them credit.
No, they the last 2 games they had to win, and the Mets scored 3 runs off them, and I've watched. And the funny part is, I've a lot of stuff I've written about with the Mets has been stuff that I didn't know. Like I said, that I've sort of dove back in and seen things that I didn't see. Even the 1986 book, I was living in Boulder, Colorado at the time, and really missed most of the stuff before the playoffs that happened to them. Because at the time there was no, you couldn't follow a team in one time zone that was playing in another. It was very hard and difficult to do, and there's a lot of 2-sentence write-ups in the newspaper, and that's about all you had. And so I got to sort of relive all of the stuff there and learn a lot of stuff that I didn't see, and in some cases I think see things that you can see when you do a lot of work on it. So I and when I went out to Oakland to do to see some of the games, and they had the old timers game there and got to meet a lot of the A's. I spent the time before then going to the library and looking up all the old Oakland Tribunes, and getting a lot of the flavor of it through there. And besides, lots of books and
good call. Stuff. Nothing like the local flavor of it all. Hey, Matthew, Silverman, not Silverstein, for crying out loud. Matthew, must I correct you always? Thank you for being here, my friend.
Well, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. I'm glad we were able to get it all together.
It took a while, but we got moxie.
Yes, and I think the last Mets book I did was Shea Stadium Remembered. So that's the last one I've had in the pipeline, pre-pandemic and everything.
Beautiful. When we get off, you send me your address, and I will send you my latest book, my first book that I wrote with George Graham. It's called Comfortably Zoned in Nevada Pine Tar. And you might be interested, and I'd love to have you read it.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Thanks so much. I will look forward to it, and I will be in contact.
Beautiful. Thank you, Matthew. Be well. Sei gesund. Thank you for listening, everybody. I'm Ralph Tycho. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The show is The Mets in the Zone. Marty Rose and Robert Cole could not be here today. Thank God we had Matt Silverstein. Silverman, for crying out loud. Be well.
All right. Thanks, Rob.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Adios, and be well. The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.